Incoming Prime Minister-designate Bibi Netanyahu accuses outgoing interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid of sedition. Meanwhile, outgoing Change Bloc coalition leaders say Bibi Netanyahu is butchering the government and leaving key ministries and agencies under the control of the far right. Finally, some thoughts from my speaking engagement at the Dallas Jewish Conservatives and the comments by Texas GOP Chairman Matt Rinaldi. Welcome to Inside Israel News, your home for unbiased and thorough analysis of Israeli news, politics, current events in the Middle East, and world news. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. This is Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac Kite. Welcome back, Insiders. Another exciting episode of Inside Israel News, your place for rational, reasonable news commentary on things going on in a world gone mad. Your host, Isaac Kite, with you as always, your gregarious Vulcan, with all my facts, logic, and reason. The world has definitely gone mad. Things are really crazy right now, and I want to say I don't know what to say, but of course I do, because I'm saying it. Things are pretty crazy, but please, keep your chin up and have a stiff upper lip, and we're soldiering through. We're just gonna move on. There have been some really interesting happenings here in the U.S. lately that have just led to some fascinating. I don't know exactly what to call it. So some fascinating craziness, I guess you could say. We had, President Trump had a dinner with, Kanye West, which he probably shouldn't have done. And, Kanye brought some nut job white supremacist with him, an anti-Semite, which is, not a good thing. Kanye's gone on to talk about how much he loves Hitler on Alex Jones' podcast. Wow. If you have crazy things to say, don't take them out on the Jews, please. We don't need that right now. But I've given him too much time already on the podcast. As far as I'm concerned, he really is irrelevant. I would like to think, although I don't know for sure, that this is the result of some kind of mental illness on his part, because Ye, as he calls himself, is kind of going nuts as it is. But in any case, it's crazy. And then, of course, you have people on the left going out there and, Republicans all believe what Kanye is saying. They just don't want to say it out loud. Sure. We're all a bunch of neo-Nazi fascists over here on the right with our tax cuts and reduced government and reducing regulation and adhering to religious principles and, fighting anti-Semitism and all that kind of stuff. Exactly what the Nazis did, right? It's not like we're trying to censor free speech or expand the power of government into every aspect of everyone's lives or destroy religious liberty or anything like that. Doing things like that would definitely, that's not what the Nazis did at all, right? Wow. The Twitter files also out. Amazing. It's one of those shaking my head moments. We all knew there was something going on there. Something dirty, something rotten, but wow, just to see the depth of it, of the collusion between the FBI and, suppressing news stories through social media. Some heads need to roll for this. Figuratively speaking, for those who, people need to be charged, people need to go to jail. If you're, at the very least, fired in disgrace. If you're at the FBI and you are, trying to silence news stories, you're violating the First Amendment, you deserve to be in a different career. You really should. Somewhere else. So like I said, there's been a lot of crazy news out there. We also had the another, one of these media misspeak, taking a comment out of context, Donald Trump saying something about, election fraud and being willing to go around even certain constitutional restrictions. It was kind of a misspeak and kind of an out there comment. I think I get the gist of what he was trying to say. Something like, this is so big, this is so huge that it would warrant, taking extraordinary steps. But obviously, now the left's out there. Trump wants to set aside the Constitution. That's really funny coming from people who've been shredding the Constitution for the last 20 years and more. These are people who don't believe in the right to bear arms. These are people actively suppressing free speech. I'm sorry, I don't see much in the way of protecting the Constitution there. Obviously, it's not very important to this lot. But probably best if the former president hadn't said that. The Constitution is sacred and sacrosanct. That said, I just want to take a moment to let's all take a deep breath. A dinner party, an off-color comment, a past associate going nuts. I mean, these are small matters, right? Donald Trump's record on supporting and helping minorities is solid. He had, an award from the NAACP as a businessman. He was much celebrated for his efforts against discrimination. His record with minorities is great. Lowest unemployment in recorded history for minority groups. And on top of that, increases in African-American business ownership, the First Step Act, the idea that somehow Donald Trump would be supporting white supremacy, it's nonsense. No sane person would believe that. 25% of the people who voted for Trump in 2020 were not white. His record on anti-Semitism is solid. I don't even need to say anything. He changed the definition. He fought anti-Semitism in the colleges. He was solidly pro-Israel. The idea that Donald Trump would be in any way anti-Semitic is just asinine. I mean, his daughter's Jewish. That's just... Again, you have to be deluded to think these things. I don't know where this stuff comes from. And finally, Donald Trump was presented with the best opportunity to subvert the Constitution in history with all this virus nonsense. So as governors in various states were shredding state and federal constitutions and the rule of law, implementing Chinese Communist Party policies in the United States. And we know now there was no scientific backing. They just, Fauci and that crowd, they just recommended doing what China had done. We definitely solidly know that. And we have studies from Johns Hopkins and other such that showed that they had no impact. The lockdowns had no impact on the behavior of the virus. In any case, Donald Trump didn't participate in that. So if he wanted to be a dictator, he had every opportunity to push the Constitution aside. So, his record, his actions speak louder than a couple of off-color comments and, a past association who's going a little nuts and off the rails. We all have friends, in our lives. And sometimes, you have friends who just lose it. And people that you distance yourself from because they are not healthy people or they need time to get back on their feet. Who knows what will happen in the future? In any case, I just wanted to take a minute. There's all this craziness going on and all these, things going around, allegations and what have you. And it's nonsense. Let's all take a deep breath, right? Let's move on. We have 2024 coming up, and I have some thoughts about that coming up later in the show. So first here, I'm going to talk a little bit about Bibi Netanyahu and the incoming government in Israel and the back and forth. I love that political banter. We have some really good ones for you today. It's getting good. From allegations of sedition to it's exciting. It's exciting. So I'll have some of that, and then I'll analyze a little bit the structure of the coalition coming together, go into a little bit of the nuts and bolts there, and then I'll wrap up by talking about my recent talk at the Dallas Jewish Conservatives, and it was a great time. The Q&A session was awesome. I included the audio as a bonus episode mostly because the Q&A session was just so good. The questions were awesome, very astute, and I thought it was a great time. Also, I mean, my talk there does kind of give a larger big picture overview of the recent election debacles and adventures. So I thought that might be a quick recap if anyone was interested. In any case, that episode's available as a bonus. So now, after the break, I will jump in with Israeli politics and political banter. The political banter is getting rich and thick. For those who've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know how much I love political banter, the back and forth, these guys are horrible. Those guys are horrible, this kind of thing. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot to be amused by in this. So there's been a lot of political banter and back and forth recently. So let's dive right in. This is just great fun. There's a... I don't want to make it sound offensive, but there is a little bit of a pettiness to Israeli politics. I mean, we have it here in the U.S. especially, but it's gotten mean in the U.S. It's very woke. It's kind of getting there in Israel too. It's reached fever pitch a couple of times, but let's just say there isn't so much the sense that there should be professional conduct in politics. That there's a lower degree of that. And so for us here, while the last few years where things have been very unprofessional and very nasty and mean-spirited in politics, especially with rhetoric coming from the left, that's the abnormal for us. We don't consider that the norm. Things have gotten that bad. For Israelis, they just don't really necessarily think that there's a norm or a polite norm. So, to a certain extent, I want to say this kind of bantering is normal, and it isn't. While it is a little bit more mean-spirited now and intense, it's not that out of place. This is the usual thing. There's been a little bit more melodrama lately with the, if Bibi's reelected, democracy will be destroyed and this kind of thing. There's been a little bit of that, and every time I hear that, I just think of those old soap operas, will Manuel marry me because I'm having his baby? Anyway, it's terrible melodrama, but, people play these kinds of games. Anyway, so Bibi is saying that outgoing interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid is spreading lies about the incoming government. And, he's talking about the rhetoric that Yair Lapid is using. And that's... I don't want to take it as far as Bibi goes, but for sure. I mean, the outgoing government is the opposition, and so it's their job to speak ill of the incoming government. They are going a little bit far talking about how bad this incoming government is purported to be. All right, so I'm just going to say that much right there. So I'll read you the direct quotes, but Bibi said that Lapid and Defense Minister Benny Gantz are refusing to accept the results of the election and are spreading false fears against a government chosen by the majority of the public. He said Lapid is waging a campaign meant to delegitimize the people's choice. Right? Lapid is saying that Netanyahu is portraying his criticism of the coalition members as sedition, saying that, he was just getting started. So this idea that somehow Lapid is committing sedition. So he's been, telling the generals not to let the far right control the government, right? And I don't think the generals are going to let that happen anyway. But telling the generals that or suggesting that doesn't make a big difference. Once Bibi Netanyahu is prime minister, he's the government. And the army, the IDF, has to follow the orders of the government. It's not, the civilian head of the government and that kind of thing. But, Lapid's entitled to his opinion. It is a little unprecedented trying to tell, the military not to listen to your successor. That's a little bit rich. But... he's trying to describe, he's trying to claim that Bibi is describing him as being seditious. And that's, trying to suggest that somehow Bibi is going to have some kind of legal crackdown or something. I don't know. That's, it's, like I said, it's rich, right? Now, Lapid's ready to take this up a notch, though. Here we go. He said, if you think what I've been saying for the last few days is seditious, I have news for you. You ain't seen nothing yet. I'm only getting started. So, Lapid is ready to go. He's on fire. He and the outgoing government are on fire. Bibi, of course, accused him, we're the sedition colony, he accused Lapid of, telling the generals and certain local government officials not to listen to Bibi and not to follow the orders of the government. That's not so much sedition as it is just politics, right? But Bibi is, calling it out in any case. And Lapid did, a general did confirm that Lapid did tell him to, be careful to make sure the far right doesn't gain control of the military. The far right, by the referring to, of course, is this religious Zionist party led by Bezalel Smotrich. And as I've said, they're a minor coalition partner, and that I'll talk about the details on that later. So it's a little bit, they're freaking out over this party joining the government, and it's a little bit rich. It's just going a little bit far. And I have to say it's a little bit ironic and a little bit amusing, because when the Arab party joined, when Ra'am joined the Change Bloc, there were some people on the right who did the same thing. They were hyperventilating about how, the Arabs were taking over the government and this kind of thing. And Lapid was sitting there like, no, that's not true. They're just 4C, just a minor party in the coalition. So the shoe is on the other foot, I suppose. So Bibi, of course, has said that he's determined to govern and execute the policy he was elected for to the benefit of Israel's citizens, as he's been doing for 20 years, right? And so he's just saying, look, you're going to have more of the same. It's going to be the status quo as it's been before. So Bibi says that, claims that by the Change Bloc that the defense ministry is being dismantled is a lie. And he says the civil administration that is being sort of put under the control of Bezalel Smotrich. I'll talk about the coalition thing later. But the step he's taking to give a little bit of the defense ministry, part of the civil administration, to Smotrich is, as he says, 1/1000% of the defense ministry. It's a tiny piece of the defense ministry is all that is, right? And there's been this controversy over Avi Mawaz. So let me just delve into this one for a second, because you're going to see headlines about it, and it's kind of silly. Avi Mawaz is from the Nawam party, which everybody says is homophobic. Homophobic is a term that we should not use. All right, this is one of these media terms, these left-wing terms. As soon as you use that term, you're playing to their agenda. So, then you're in the middle, I'm not homophobic, and they make you sound like, well, of course, someone who's homophobic would say that. Homophobia means, in Greek, fear of sameness, which I always find amusing. But obviously they intend it as fear of those who are interested in the same sex, obviously homosexuals. This is a ridiculous term, because nobody who supports traditional values is afraid of gay people, right? Like we don't think gay people are dangerous or harmful or gonna, they're not terrorists. They're just different, and they go live their lives their way, right? But we don't necessarily want that in our face, right? Well, the Nawam party is, let's just say, I don't want to necessarily say intolerant of, because that might push it a little bit, but it's sort of on the borderline there. But let's just say that they are less tolerant and less accepting of homosexuality than the Israeli mainstream, which is, culturally pretty far left and pretty accepting, right? And Mawaz is being given control over a very tiny piece of the education ministry, a tiny program. Now, granted, he's been going out and making all kinds of dumb statements. He's been saying, well, we should cancel the gay pride parade and turn back the LGBTQ agenda and this kind of thing. So he has been shooting his mouth off and making a big deal out of it. But Bibi has pointed out everything is going to be status quo. There's not going to be any change on the issue of gay rights in Israel, right? There are civil unions for homosexual couples. Gay people live free in Israel. They're not oppressed or persecuted. That's not going to change. Now, personally, and here's where Mawaz might actually get some points if he'd push this instead of shooting his mouth off about gay pride parades. It would be nice to see a step back from pushing all of that agenda into people's faces, right? We're talking about a very tiny minority of the population. They have their freedom. It's okay. Not a big deal. Why does it need to be in our faces constantly? Right? All of this woke morality nonsense about, how they want to have us, constantly abused and picked on, like, you're not being accepting enough of gay people. Anyway, so that's my commentary on that. It's really nothing. It's a big nothing burger, but the left is trying to make a big deal out of it because those kinds of social issues are really the only wedge that they have left. Voters have rejected the change bloc. They've lost the election. I would think, and I know that they're making a big thing out of Bibi is destroying the government and destroying the rule of law and ending democracy and all this kind of nonsense. At the same time, I'd also, if I were Lapid and Gantz, look at the election and say, hey, we lost, right? You win some, you lose some. But, so if you see a football team, if they lose a game, it wouldn't behoove them to go out on the field and do a whole bunch of posturing about, we're the baddest, we're the biggest, we're the meanest, whatever. Yeah, you lost. Nobody wants to hear it, okay? Play a better game next time. So that's a lot of what we're getting here. A little bit of poor sportsmanship, trying to drum up a whole bunch of fear about everything. Lapid goes on, though. Netanyahu said this week that the fact that I'm calling on the heads and authorities not to cooperate with Boaz is sedition. There's no limit to this man's shamelessness. We are not your suckers. We're not here just to pay taxes and send our children to the army. Most of the people are against this conduct, including Likudniks. Okay, so Lapid's entitled to his opinion. He's against Bibi. He's really upset about the far right joining the coalition. Kind of interesting that he didn't do anything to prevent that, since it's obvious that Bibi has won and that the people of Israel want Bibi to be their prime minister, right? Maybe he might just take a step back and say, okay, if they want Bibi to be the prime minister, then maybe they should join his government. I mean, if Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid had been willing to sit in government with Bibi, he wouldn't have needed these far-right parties, right? So the left wants to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be able to say, the far right is in the government, they're fruitcakes, they're whack jobs, we won't cooperate, generals shouldn't cooperate, the education ministry shouldn't cooperate, and all this kind of thing. And at the same time, they did nothing to prevent these people from coming to the government, right? The reason the religious Zionists are in the government is that Lapid and Gantz and these people have been refusing to sit with Bibi. And we had 5 elections because they wouldn't compromise. And in the end, Israeli voters rejected them and said, no, that, this funny thing about democracy, it's only democracy when you win, right? Especially when it comes to the left. But, bad joke. But, democracy is great when you win, isn't it? When you lose, it's really hard to swallow your pride and say, hey, we lost. We admit it. It's time to move on. We're not getting a lot of that from the Israeli left. In any case, it's funny. So, so that's some of the banter going on there. So Bibi's accusing Lapid of sedition. He's undermining the election results and this kind of thing. And Lapid is sitting there like, we're not your suckers. We're not here just to roll over and play dead, basically. Summarizing. I'm paraphrasing there, obviously. So they're going back and forth. It's always exciting. Another exciting day in Israeli politics with the banter back and forth and all the controversies. When I get back, I will talk about how this new coalition government is coming together. It's my pleasure, as always, to bring you Inside Israel news and keep you apprised of politics and current events in Israel and the Middle East. But you might wonder, how do I create these podcasts? Well, the answer is simple, and it's also free. The price is right. I use Anchor. Anchor allows me to create the podcast episodes and edit them and produce them on my phone, and also on my computer if I so wished. And not only does Anchor allow me to record them and provide that ability, they are also like a partner in the podcast world. They make sure that my podcast is listed on Apple, Spotify, and so many other platforms. You can make money from a podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So if you're interested in creating a podcast, do like I did. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So how is Bibi's coalition coming together? That is a really good question. And there are some technical things going on that it can be a little confusing, especially with all the banter going back and forth, as I just described. Oh, these people are doing that. So I wanted to discuss this issue of the dismantling of the defense ministry and the butchering of the government and all this kind of thing, where that rhetoric is coming from the change bloc. This is a really unique set of coalition talks where Bibi is. Now, Bibi leads the Likud party, which has over 30 seats in the Knesset and in the incoming 25th Knesset. And he has the largest party in the coalition. Right? Now, typically that means that's the leading party of the coalition in these multi-party proportional systems. Where he has to get from there as to what we, in sort of academic terminology with regard to these types of systems, call the minimum majority coalition, or MMC. And in order to get there, there's 61 seats as a majority of 120, right? 120 seats total, 61 as a majority. Bibi has 32, right? So he has to add, right? If you're looking at the numbers, like, yeah, he needs another 29 seats. Well, where's he going to get those seats? Well, so he goes to the Orthodox parties, Shas and UTJ. They're adding him, a few more seats. He knows those parties. They've worked together in the past. They know that if they work with Bibi, he doesn't give them everything they want, but he also doesn't hold anything back, right? So he doesn't injure their interests. So they're comfortable with him. They get more from him than they would get from any other government. Let's put it that way. So it's the best deal for them. But, people have been talking about, with the religious parties, the country's going to be ruled by religious law. And Bibi's already come out and said, no, the country, Israel is not going to be ruled by Talmud. Talmud is commentaries on the Torah. And what he means by that is there are a lot of people who want to implement greater religious law in Israel, shutting down public transport on Shabbat, among other things. Shabbat is sunset Friday to sunset Saturday, religious holiday for religious Jews especially. But secular people who don't observe the religious holiday, they take off from work, but they don't necessarily observe the holiday the way by the strictures that other religious people do. And so, they want public transit and they want other things like that. Life to kind of go on normally, especially in the big cities like Tel Aviv, whereas the religious want everything shut down. This is an example. In any case, Bibi's saying that there's going to be a status quo on religion and state issues. That things aren't going to change there. But the change bloc, the outgoing government and now incoming opposition, right? They're making as big a deal out of this as they can because these social issues are their main wedge. As I've described before, Yair Lapid and the left are moving center left. They're more free market. They're not the social democrats of the past, the socialists, if you will. The Labour Party is almost non-existent at this point. The old left, they're pretty much gone. So these social issues are their main issues as the left. They are left because they are against special privileges for the ultra-Orthodox and the called the Haredi in Israel. They are the left because they oppose more, the religious side of religion and state issues with regard to writing laws, so on and so forth. They're not as much, and they're left in that they want to build stronger ties with Arab governments and what have you, diplomatically pro-peace, generally speaking, but not psychotically so, not suicidally so. So that's how they're left. But they're not left as in, as socialist left as we might think. Now, Yair Lapid would be, center left, center right in most European countries, and that. So anyway, so Bibi knows he has Likud support. That's his party. He has the Orthodox. That's all good. But the religious Zionists are a new party. They only came together 2 years ago, right? They are a coalition or a joint list, if you will, of 5 separate parties. One of them being Noam. I mentioned earlier Avi Moaz as part of that party. He's been making the anti-LGBTQ comments or what have you that people are freaking out about. And one of them is Otzma Yehudit, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Ben-Gvir and Otzma are the Kahanist or far-right, militantly far-right party. And as I said in the if you listen to the Dallas Jewish, I mean, a lot's happened since Meir Kahana's time. I don't think, Ben Gvir is I don't think he's a mainstream politician. I still think there's a danger in his being in the coalition. I, for one, don't like his presence in the coalition. But I think the whole, Smotrich and the whole religious Zionists are too far right for my taste. I think they are beyond the pale of what is normal for Israeli society. But you know what? Israelis have the right to vote. They voted for these people, and they're going to end up being in the coalition. The only way that could have been prevented would have been if Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid had been willing to negotiate with Bibi so that they would join the coalition instead and prevent these far-right people from coming in. But, of course, there's no chance of that after, all these elections and all this dumbness, all of this drama and melodrama and all these things. So, anyway. So they're saying that Bibi's chopping up the administration. Well, as we're learning details about these negotiations, we're finding out that a lot of those things that are being said just aren't true. So what we had heard before, what I had heard before, kind of on the inside track, was that they were talking about moving the civil administration. That is, those who, the civilian government administrators of Area C in Judea and Samaria, where a lot of Jewish communities are. Everyone calls them settlements. They're not settlements. They're Jewish communities. They're homes, people live in, little towns. Okay. And they're in territory that was set aside in the original Oslo Accord as Area C for Jewish growth and development. In any case, that civil administration is part of the defense ministry because it's not part of the Ministry of the Interior or any of the internal ministries, because it has to do with national security. That area is, there's terrorism, there's problems with the Palestinians, so it's a national security issue. So we'd heard that the civil administration was going to be moved from the defense ministry to the finance ministry so that Bezalel Smotrich, who's coming in as finance minister, would be able to govern it. Well, that was the way it was portrayed. That's what we heard. However, now what we're hearing is something a little smarter. Instead of doing that, right, that would actually be carving something out of the defense ministry and moving it over to the finance ministry. Since that was first discussed, or that talking point came out, we have heard since that instead what is going to happen is Bezalel Smotrich is going to be made an under-minister of defense. He's going to be given a second job as an under-minister of defense to head the civil administration. So he himself will be finance minister and still head the civil administration for Judea and Samaria, but he will do so with two different positions. This is a technical thing, and I realize if you're a little confused, that's okay. So let me just make the point. It's a little bit of tomato, okay? If and I'll use a U.S. example, right? Let's just take the National Guard, right? Let's just say that, we have a Secretary of the Treasury who comes in and is very, very important here politically. It's hard to describe an example in America because, of course, we don't have these coalition governments. So no individual political person would be that important. But let's just say for some reason, whoever was elected president owed their presidency to one particular governor, and they're going to make that governor Secretary of the Interior, just as I said Treasury before, but Secretary of the Interior. But that particular governor wants to control the National Guard, right? They want the National Guard to be under their jurisdiction, right? So you could move the National Guard from the Department of Defense, the federalized aspect of the National Guard. The National Guard is state, run by the state. Each state has its own guard. But the federal administration of the National Guard, when called into federal service, you could move that authority over to the defense, from the Defense Department to the Department of Interior, right? Or you could say that whoever is at the Department of Interior will also have a job as the Undersecretary for the National Guard. Right? Just throw that out there. I mean, and just, now it's one person who has both roles. So that one person still controls the National Guard and the Interior Defense, the Interior Department. But they would be doing so as two separate jobs. And that's what's happening here with Smotrich. He wants to control the civil administration, the civilian government of Judea and Samaria, the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, what the international press erroneously calls the West Bank. West Bank of what? I don't know. When it was part of Jordan, it kind of made sense that it was Jordan's territories west of the Jordan, right? The West Bank of the Jordan. Now it's part of Israel. It's not the West Bank of anything, right? It's Judea and Samaria, which is what it's always been called. It's not even a convenient, it was a convenient label for it, I guess, when Jordan controlled that territory, but it's not necessary now. So he reverts to its older names. It's been called Judea and Samaria for thousands of years, and we'll continue to call it that. In any case, so that's what he wants. Now, Smotrich is happy. He gets to be Minister of Finance. He gets to control the purse strings. Although under some direction from Bibi and the cabinet, of course. He's not going to do that independently, right? He is going to control the civil administration. But he's not going to be in complete control of that either, right? So, it's just, that's, again, it's making a mountain of a molehill. It's really not a big deal. It's just something that he wants. And because it's a particularly technically challenging thing, it's just requiring a little bit of acrobatics, government acrobatics on the part of the of Bibi and the coalition in order to make this thing work. So, you can see, obviously this is a bunch of stuff. Now, I told you before the election, and you already knew, as I said, Bibi Netanyahu, if he put this government together, he would want to control the defense ministry. Likud would control the defense ministry, and that's true. Yoav Gallant, who is Likud MK, is widely believed to be the incoming defense minister. So, Bibi's going to control defense. He's going to control the foreign ministry. He's going to control the big ministries. And, he's letting Smotrich have control of the civil administration for Judea and Samaria, and Ben-Gvir have a little extra power. Come into that in just a second, in order to bring them into the coalition. They're minor parties in the coalition, and they're not going to have a big part of it. This education role that he's giving to Avi Moaz from Noam has nothing to do with the LGBTQ agenda, repressing gay people or being, terrified of gay people. It's a tiny piece of the education ministry that deals with Jewish identity. And it's very important to these religious Zionists who want Jewish identity to be more important. They want to promote this idea of a Jewish identity. That's part of their political agenda. So that's just Bibi throwing them some red meat, but it's a tiny thing. And it's not going to have, promoting a Jewish identity is not going to be, allow some kind of hate fest against gay people. It's just, again, civil society is going to go ahead normally and everybody's just going to move on. So that's that. Now, for Itamar Ben-Gvir. Now, Itamar Ben-Gvir is part of this far-right, militant Kahanist party that, it's a party where people in the past have advocated for violence, offensive violence against the Arabs instead of just defense. Meir Kahane is a very controversial figure in the Jewish community. He's behind a massacre in the past. And so there's this, I don't want to go into that controversy right now. Just that there are people who think he's awesome, a very small handful, and most of the Jewish people in the world, including most Israelis, think he was extremely dangerous, somewhat fascist in a real use of that term. Not, people are bandy about the word fascist for anybody they don't like. It's just, it's the new cognate for jerk. Anyone you don't like isn't a jerk, they're a fascist, right? But he actually advocated for, government control of things and the removal of certain peoples, this kind of thing, the kinds of powers that a government would have if it were fascist. So it's more accurate in his case. In any case, Ben-Gvir is not Meir Kahane. Ben-Gvir is a politician today in a party that is some distance from Meir Kahane. Kahane was killed back in the 90s by Al-Qaeda. And this is just so, times have moved on. Now, he's, as I've talked about, his party is especially beyond the pale, right? Avi Moaz is very vocal in terms of his his not wanting to promote the LGBTQ community's agenda, but he's not that far distant from the Orthodox Jews. Right. And so my point is, in terms of the political mainstream, Avi Moaz isn't that far out of the mainstream. Betzalel Smotrich is right, but not that far out of the mainstream. So they're a little bit of a shift right. Ben-Gvir is a significant shift to the right. Okay. And is part of a party, Otzma Yehudit means, Jewish strength, basically. And so they are out there. All right. I don't want to make it a big deal, to justify everybody saying, oh, he's a fascist, he's a nut job, he's a kook, he's a whatever. At the same time, I want to be clear that, to most Israelis, this is a person way outside the political mainstream. Somebody very controversial who said a lot of things and done, advocated for a lot of things that people find out there. Okay. Anyway. He is going to be the head of a new post called the Minister of National Security. That way, that new post allows a little bit of reorganization. That's not butchering the government. It's just creating a new office that there's no particular office that fits for him. Bibi is not going to give him a high office, certainly not an office higher than Smotrich, who's the leader of the religious Zionists altogether. But he's going to give him this sort of minor ministry as national security minister, what have you. And part of that will be that he will control border police around Judea and Samaria, and have a few other powers in that post. And again, it's not government butchery, just a little bit of reorganization for the convenience of the cabinet. Every government has done some reorganization. Sometimes you'll have governments that have, they need a lot of people in the cabinet, or rather, there are a lot of important people in the coalition that really want to be in the cabinet. So they'll have what they call minister without portfolio. It means you're in the cabinet and you're technically a cabinet minister, but you have no job. There's no ministry that you head. So you fill up all the ministries, then you add these ministers without portfolio. And then some governments have come in and said, we're going to get rid of all of the ministers without portfolio, and the only people in the cabinet are people who have real jobs to be in the cabinet, right? Something like that. So you go back and forth. There's a lot of flexibility there. And I want to say this is one of the benefits of this system, right? In the U.S., we're very slow to reorganize things. After 9/11, we did create the Department of Homeland Security. Basically the last time we did any major restructuring in the federal government. But every one of those cabinet positions, every one of those departments in the federal government that we have was created, here and there, going as American history went on, for some purpose or another, right, to fit one particular time. And you could argue that some of those departments are obsolete. Right? What does the Department of Commerce really do? Why do we need it? Well, Department of Energy, why do we need it? What are these? What are these departments doing? Department of Education has, we've had that since the 70s, and since the inception of the Department of Education, America's education system is tanked. We say that correlation is not causation, but let's just say that the U.S. Department of Education has done nothing to help. Right? There's no evidence that it's helped the situation. Anyway, so this is just a little minor restructuring for the convenience of the cabinet. It happens all the time. The flexibility of the cabinet system is one of the benefits of this political system, right? Is that, Bibi has somebody who is too important for a really, really minor ministry like sport and culture in terms of getting them into the coalition, but not important enough to be, foreign minister or finance minister or, one of these big jobs in the government. Right. So he just creates a new job that's kind of in between, a little bit moderate important. So Ben-Gvir will be happy. So the way this is all going to work in terms of practice is that very little will change in terms of the structure of the government. So this idea that the government's being butchered is silly, and a lot of normalcy will be maintained. As I've said before, when Bibi is in office, it's the Bibi show. Right? He is the one who runs the government. He does everything his way. He really doesn't allow a lot of room for other people's opinions. And I want to say the minus of that is that he's not collegial. He doesn't have a lot of partners who help him govern. Like the Change Bloc had a really good team in office, the sense of teamwork, right? A lot of big names, not one big person who stood out above everybody else. At the same time, I want to say the blessing of the Bibi show, of Bibi running things his way, is that, he will govern as he has governed before. Things will have moved a little bit to the right, but he'll be governing much as he did in 2017, 2018, 2019, back when he had a government before all of these election disasters happened. Nevertheless, because it's the Bibi show, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and Avi Moaz and all of these guys are making sure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are topped in the coalition agreement, and that all of their stuff is negotiated ahead of time, nothing implied, but you said, no, it's all got to be inked out because they know Bibi will do whatever Bibi wants to do, and they don't want him to renege on his promises. So that's the nature of the government. It's farther right than it's ever been. Israelis have the right to choose their own government, and they've clearly voted for this government led by Bibi with the religious Zionists and the Orthodox in the government. Okay, so they have their right to choose their leaders. That doesn't mean that everyone else in the world has to like it. The U.S. government has expressed some concern. I mentioned Senator Bob Menendez made comments about his concerns about religious Zionists, especially Otzma Yehudit and Itamar Ben-Gvir serving in the government. That's there. I mean, that's something that's going to be a point of contention between the two. Although the America-Israel relationship is still strong, the Biden administration's given Israel a little bit of a cold shoulder, but still, certainly relative to the Trump administration, but still, that relationship is going to remain a strong one and a positive one. We have heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken that he made a statement saying that the government, our government, the United States government, would take the measure of the new Israeli government based upon its policies, not upon its personalities. So he's saying, okay, so this Ben-Gvir guy is in the government, but that doesn't mean we're going to condemn him right away. We're going to watch and see what happens. Now, the first sign of trouble, they're going to, go after him. They're already, the Department of Justice has launched an investigation into the shooting of Akre, that Palestinian propagandist. Almost certainly either an accident or she was shot by her own side. We don't know for sure what's happened. There's, obviously you can't trust Palestinian investigators on the topic. Al Jazeera is out saying they have a new video that shows that it was deliberate. Al Jazeera has taken its time coming up with this video, so I'm certain it hasn't been doctored in any way or edited or anything, So Blinken, I think, is on the right track there. Also, the choice of Hakeem Jeffries to join Democrat Party leadership in the House. He's a relatively pro-Israel Democrat, and so there's been some moves that show that the Democrat Party is at least giving some lip service to its being pro-Israel, and I think they're striking a more accommodating tone coming into this. That said, violence is ramping up. The Pallies have seen that this is an opportunity to agitate and get some good PR, and so there's been a lot of violence. There's been some rocket fire from Gaza, and Israel, of course, has responded and made sure that the terrorist groups that launch these rockets are attacked, and Israel will defend itself. And we've also got a video going around, somebody on Twitter, some kook, anti-Semitic kook in Australia, as it were, coming after me about, this video about a police officer who, some Arab kid tried to take his gun, took his rifle from him, and once the kid had his hands on it, the guy was quick. He grabbed his pistol and he shot him. I mean, when someone takes your gun, if you don't shoot them, they're going to shoot you. It's self-defense. And I'm just sitting here like, what's going on here? And the guy's like, that's summary execution. And I'm like, no, it's self-defense. Back to this thing that Jews shouldn't defend ourselves. Jews should just die, right? We're just supposed to die. That's our lot in life. These people see us and they're like, no, Jews go to the gas chambers. When a Jewish police officer has a gun taken, he should just die, right? We're supposed to die. Rockets are fired at us. Buses are blown up. We're just supposed to die, and we're not allowed to do anything to defend ourselves. God forbid. No anti-Semitism in that. So I thought I'd pass some of those things along. There's going to be a lot of agitation now, because of the presence of these right-wing parties in the government, the left over here is going to agitate against Israel more, and we're going to see a lot more anti-Semitic rhetoric. The number of people who are anti-Semites is not going to change. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is becoming quite popular now, on the left especially, and in the African-American community. And that's really sad, considering that for a long time, the two communities, the Jews and the black community, were allies in fighting for civil rights. So it's sad to see. And this is really unfortunate, although Louis Farrakhan has been spending a long time trying to attack Jews in the black community. Anyway, we'll hear some more rhetoric from the U.S. We'll wait and see. I'm pleasantly surprised at the way the Biden administration is handling the situation with Israel right now. And let's just hope that they continue to be positive and reasonable about that as we go forward. When we get back from the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about Matt Rinaldi's talk, the Texas GOP chair, and a little bit of U.S. politics to wrap up this episode. So after I spoke at the Dallas Jewish Conservatives, the other guest speaker that was there that night was Matt Rinaldi, the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Texas GOP. And Matt Rinaldi was there to talk about the good news with regard to Texas election results. And he made a number of fair points that I wanted to cover here real quick. I know it's U.S. politics and this is an Israeli news episode, but I thought it relevant. And if you listen to the last episode, you hear the Q&A. There was a little bit of commentary from me on American political issues. If you want to hear Matt Rinaldi's whole talk at DJC, you can go look up the Dallas Jewish Conservative page on Facebook, and it was live streamed as a Facebook Live, so you can watch the whole thing there. If you've already listened to the audio from me, my talk there, just skip forward to where Matt takes over. He did a really great talk there. And I just wanted to note, he was pointing out, of course, that Texas has been purpling and that the margins have been getting narrower and narrower in Texas, several statewide officers winning by something like 3% and what have you. But this election was different. This time it was double digits. And not just because, let's say we had, the GOP in Texas had really great candidates this year. They had some really good candidates for sure, or that the Democrat candidates were so bad. We saw that there was no red wave, especially. So obviously, that didn't happen. So what gives? How did they manage to get higher margins nationally? He was explaining that while the margins were about the same in urban and suburban areas of the state, which is probably why, since those are the more purple parts of the state, those are the areas that you would need if you were going to gain significantly. So those margins were about the same. But in rural areas in Texas, the turnout was much higher. So turning out the Republican base in Texas widened the margins and ensured ongoing control of statewide offices and, U.S. Senate seats and House seats and other such for Republicans in Texas. But it's how he went about this. He has pushed for stronger get out the vote efforts. He also put in a program to bring precinct judges, which is what they call in Texas poll watchers, basically, right? Who go and watch the elections and make sure that everything's going, smoothly at the polls, and things like that. And so again, you can listen to his talk. He gives a great talk. He was, obviously talking about the things he did, and obviously he did a great job. The results speak for themselves. In Texas and Florida, the Republican Party has definitely solidified those two states. And those are no longer purple states, no longer battleground states. Those are Republican states, and very solidly so. And that's That's good for the GOP. That's 70 electoral votes between the two of them. That basically neutralizes California and New Jersey, which is big. That's a lot of electoral votes right there. Okay, so you can go listen to his talk and hear the finer points of that. One of the things that came up in the Q&A was the difference between political parties in, say, a multi-party proportional system and political parties over here. And I did talk a little bit in the Q&A about how our political parties here are more like standing coalitions. Right, they're ready-made coalitions of various voting groups that shift between the parties as one party or the other seeks their interests. But what we see in America is that our political parties are not so much ideological units, and so the question comes up. And here, going off of what Matt Rinaldi was saying, what do we do? What should our political parties here in the U.S. be doing? Right, what is their role if they're not so much ideological? Clubs, or if you will, like they are in multi-party proportional systems, but standing coalitions that change and vary over time. Well, that's easy. Basically what Matt Rinaldi's been doing, first and foremost, turn out the base. Right? The political party's goal, the RNC and all of the state Republican parties, just like the DNC and all the state Democrat parties, those parties should be turning out their voters. Turning out their voters in great numbers helps their candidates and helps their side win, right? And that's what a political party should do. They should also send poll watchers, both parties, to various polling locations, especially troubled ones or ones where you expect issues, to make sure that there's no funny business going on. And that is a huge benefit to democracy, because then when you have a fair election, everyone can come out at the end and say, yeah, the election was good. We need that. We need a lot of that right now. It's terrible because we just can't trust election results anymore in some places. We're not sure. In Arizona, for example, in Maricopa County, we're not sure how that election was handled because voting machines are breaking down. They couldn't or wouldn't fix them, and a large number of conservative voters felt disenfranchised and were not able to vote in statewide elections which were very tight. Similar things happened in Berlin, as I described before in a previous episode. Berlin is rerunning its election, right, and that's what should happen in Arizona because we can't verify the accuracy of the election results. Anyway, so Rinaldi did those two things. A third thing I think a political party should do. So turn out the base, watch the elections, and a third thing they should do is connect party activists with the institutions of government so that those people who do the work for the party can go and, be represented well. That is, present themselves before the elected officials and be close to them and that kind of thing. And he's doing a great job of that, working on trying to get the Texas legislature to change its rules that allow the minority party to hold committee chairmanships. And, we're talking about Texas here, the strong Republican majorities in both houses of the state legislature, and in the state house in Texas, there's Democrat committee chairs, and not just any Democrat, really woke committee chairs who are out there promoting, extreme views. So, that's a problem, and that's something that they're working on. So I'm glad to see his activism there. It leads me to a larger commentary that Matt Rinaldi and I share. I agree with him, and therefore that's why I want to share here. And I'll amplify his voice to the extent that I can. And that is that, the goal then of the party institution is to win. Right? And, get out the vote, ensure the veracity and sanctity of the elections, and also, connect the party faithful with elected officials so that those elected officials can actually represent them. It's a big problem we have in the U.S. that the Republican Party for a long time has been terrible at representing its voters. If they had been better at representing their voters, we wouldn't need a Donald Trump. We would need someone to come from the outside and push the party to do what it should be doing already. In terms of the election veracity, however, election sanctity, there's a little bit, and also get out the vote, there's a little bit of agility that we need there. And this is one of the problems we have with the GOP especially. It's very static. It's very slow to change. The fact is, whether we like it or not, in 2020, this mail-in voting thing happened and the ballot harvesting and all that kind of nonsense. They made this stuff legal in a bunch of these states. And the left likes to change these rules because it gives them the advantage. And they know that the GOP will not be agile. It will not be quick to adapt. right? So the GOP loses races. This is where change is needed. If the Democrats can do ballot harvesting, so can we, right? If it's legal in California, then let's ballot harvest at churches and old folks' homes and business associations, and let's go ballot harvest with our natural base, right? Now in California, ballot harvesting is legal, and the California GOP did some ballot harvesting. Now, obviously, in California, the best you can do is cut your losses at this point, but the GOP did a much better than expected in California. They performed better than anyone thought they would, and that is a good sign. Right, so that's the point. Play the game better than they do, or at least as well as they do. The GOP in Nevada did not do ballot harvesting, where ballot harvesting is legal in Nevada. And while obviously the GOP won the governorship in Nevada, they did not win down-ticket races, and Adam Laxalt did not win a Senate race. It was a question of 10,000 votes. Right, a little ballot harvesting at churches or business associations or old folks' homes could have brought Republican votes in to bridge that gap and put our guy over the top. When they change the rules, we don't have to agree with it. I mean, obviously, I disagree with ballot harvesting. I disagree with mail-in voting at all. I think voting should be on election day like they do in Israel. It's secure, in person, with an ID. You prove that you have a right to vote. You come there and you vote. Okay, but in any case, whether we like that or not, those are the laws. So if that's the law, if it's legal to do these things, then we should do them too. Our people should be out there collecting ballots and making sure that those ballots are turned in if it's legal. Obviously, ballot harvesting is not legal in Texas, so we wouldn't do it there. But you get the point. That you can register people to vote at churches and nonprofit organizations in Texas, like anywhere else, but you can't collect ballots there. My point being, where this stuff is legal, Pennsylvania, Nevada, California, by all means, the GOP should get in there and get down in the mud and fight this out, okay? We also need to be more agile in court and get into the courtroom. And, when they did all this stuff back in 2020, we should have been right on top of it with lawyers and suing them the day these changes were made to seek injunctions, not, after the election. After the election's too late, okay? You need to know which ballots are valid before the election takes place. And this is another area of agility. Nobody thinks to go to these, go fight these battles. A few people have tried. They just lack the resources, right? So go fight those legal battles. Turn out the vote. Make sure the elections are secure. If turning out the vote means you can do ballot harvesting, then by all means, let's do that too. At least that will cut our losses and strengthen our position. The fastest way to get rid of all this stuff is for the GOP to do it too. Okay, I had this joke after 2020. It was like, you had Mark Zuckerberg go in and do basically, he financed Democrat GOTV through the county offices, in Pennsylvania, in blue counties in Pennsylvania. And I said, look, if Mike Lindell went to Pennsylvania and said, I'm going to go to the red counties in Pennsylvania and I'm going to fund GOP voter outreach and GOTV through those county offices, it would be illegal in 5 minutes, right? If Republicans wanted to do it, they'd make it illegal quickly. I mean, the point is, if we play their game better than they do, they will have no advantage at these things and they won't be able to defend them. Or they won't want to defend them as strongly, And to a certain degree, is it cheating? Is it fraud? I wouldn't say it's fraud necessarily. Is it cheating? Is it disingenuous? Yes. But, you have to play the game the way the game is played. If you're a football team and you are known for your passing game and you come into one particular game and you're thinking, you know what, we're going to run the ball more this time because we are always passing and we just want to make sure that, we're going to throw the defense off. And you go a couple of drives and they're just shutting down your running game. Pass. Adapt to the situation, right? The way their defense is playing, adapt. Okay? If they're shutting down your passing game, run. Adapt. The GOP needs to adapt. And that comes to the final point, is GOP leadership. We have two awesome candidates contesting the RNC chairmanship. You're going to hear a little bit about this first here. It's only been yesterday that one of the candidates announced. But Lee Zeldin has been talking about running for RNC chair. Lee Zeldin was the Republican gubernatorial candidate in New York. And while he lost narrowly fairly narrowly in what should have been a blowout race for the Democrat governor, he did encourage higher voter turnout and participation, which won the Republican Party 4 seats in New York. So, deep blue New York, 4 seats gained for the GOP, thanks to Lee Zeldin. So Lee Zeldin certainly has a really good message, and I like that. Good organization, good message. One of the other candidates, as someone I also really like, is Harmeet Kaur Dhillon. Harmeet is awesome. She's a superstar. She's one of the greatest attorneys on the Republican side. She's been fighting for freedom of speech for a long time. She's taken on a lot of big cases. She's helping Kari Lake fight out this quagmire with Maricopa County in Arizona. And even if Kari Lake doesn't ultimately get that, we don't get a rerun of the election, even if we don't win, we have to fight back. If they can get away with these games now, they'll do it again. Okay? So Harmeet's a superstar too. I really love Harmeet. I think she'd do a great job. I like Lee Zeldin. I think he'd do a great job. Both candidates are awesome. It's hard to say. I just think either of them would make great leadership, and I really think the RNC needs right now Harmeet's drive and determination and her legal prowess. We really need to make sure we get these elections cleaned up legally before the 2024 election. We cannot go to the 2024 elections with voting machines breaking down, they know Republicans prefer to turn out on election day, so they can have voting machines break down all across the country, right? We need to make sure that's not going to happen. We need to make sure we're fighting these battles in court when we have to, and that kind of thing. Lee Zeldin for sure, great message. Winning elections in blue states. He's a good leader there too. Either of them would be great. I'm just going to say I think Harmeet is really what the party needs right now because of her legal prowess and making sure that the 2024 election is fair. The most important thing about democracy is when it's all done, when the smoke clears and the dust settles and we have all the votes counted, we all need to be able to sit back and take a deep breath, whether we won or lost, and say that was a fair election. Okay, that was a fair game. Okay, that's important. When it's not a fair game, when it's not a fair election, that leads to a lot of problems, as we've seen in the last few years. And we need to make sure that's happening. On the other side of that, this Twitter files thing with the destruction of freedom of speech and the Constitution in this country, it's just asinine. But at least Twitter doesn't belong to the woke left anymore, and they're not going to be able to use it for their own purposes. And Facebook is having serious financial problems, and I would say it's a dying platform. It's old news. So, little bit by little bit, we are getting free of CNN's firing all its anchors. Little bit by little bit, the institutions of wokeness are going broke. Go woke, go broke, right? This leads me to my final message on American politics, if I may. Just one last thought. We need to hold it together. Okay, you've heard me talk about game theory on the podcast before. I'm not a great mathematician. I don't like mathematics so much, but I really do love logic. I enjoy, if this, then that kind of stuff. And, you creating these, you can't control human variables, but you can narrow the mathematical options and look at the most likely outcomes of different contests and what have you. And they give you some insight into how to contest those games. We're in the middle of an infinite contest, an infinite game here. It's not just a finite game. It's not just winning 2024. We are in a long-term game contest with the woke left. And the most important thing we can do is stick together. Bad dinner parties and dumb comments about the Constitution are just talk. They're just mistakes. It's stupid. Shouldn't have happened. I agree. But there it is. We can't take it back and we can't undo it. I wish the former president would be a little more careful what he says and what he does. But, we have to stick together and we have to fight this thing out. We can't forgive everything, but that's how we win. If we divide, if we break up, that's the fastest path to defeat. With that, it's another great episode in the can. Looks like another fun